before we get into all the nooks and crannies and nuts and bolts of Provenance, why don't you take us back to the beginning of where you grew up, what was life like for you growing up, and some of the ingredients that led to your journey?
Sure, yeah. So, I grew up in London, so from North London. Grew up with a documentary filmmaker father, so running around the globe doing quite a lot of work uncovering mostly shock documentary style, and a mum who was a very strong, conscious consumer, let's put it that way.
Okay.
Very interested in the ethics of products. So that combo kind of led me to become very curious about products, how they're created. And I ended up I guess at uni, the kind of decision to go and study engineering, that led me to work quite a lot in looking at supply chains and manufacturing engineering.
Okay. So you kind of got this interest in the stories that we tell and finding the truth and that kind of thing. You've got a bit of conscious consumer, thinking about your own habits.
Totally.
And then how do you design for those kinds of things? Those are kind of the ingredients going on, right?
100%, yeah.
And then, so what happened when you came out of university then?
Yeah, I went. So actually, I went to work in LA after uni for a company that hasn't got the best track record, American Apparel.
Okay.
But actually, when I was in America, so I came to American Apparel as an engineer because I spent a lot of my uni days looking a lot at fashion production and how garments were created. So yeah, landed in LA after uni, and actually American Apparel were doing some really interesting new forms of advertising where they were basically putting their factories on billboards, which at the time was quite novel. So this was kind of 2007. And yeah, they had whole advertising campaigns in magazines which just showed their supply chain, how their products were created, and they were also doing a lot of work to fight for the rights of their workers. So, manufacturing in downtown LA, but lots of their workers didn't necessarily have visas or the rights to stay in the US, and so rather than kick them out of the factory, which a lot of people had done in LA, they were actually standing up for those workers and fighting for their right to be there and work in the US. So hugely inspiring to me to think about how we can be more transparent as a brand.
And so did the journalist in you, as you were watching all of this happen, was it just the story at the front, or did they have integrity behind that as well? Did they go all the way through themselves?
There was a lot wrong with American Apparel.
Right.
The founder wasn't maybe the best of eggs, but the supply chain and the transparency story was actually very true based on a lot of fact. They were a really unique company. I mean, they were end-to-end manufacturing in the US. They were buying cotton from Texas, and so much of their production process was happening in the US, which really is quite novel at the time. They had a lot of the cred to back it up, but I just found it super interesting that they were using that in their marketing, and sparked my kind of fascination, I guess, with transparency and how we could know more about the products we buy.
And so what was the next step then?
I did a lot of other stuff in between. Worked in cotton trading for a while, so got to know the financial side of supply chains. And then I did a bit of a career pivot and went into digital product design and development. And then worked in that for a while for several brands, and also some other companies, some pop stars, helping them develop apps and usually sort of digital, physical kind of creative tech products. Which meant I created tons of different applications and interactive experiences for brands. And then, I guess I kind of always held this kind of fascination and love for trying to move us beyond advertising as we know it today. It feels just so strange that when we buy a product, the whole story for why we've bought into that product was kind of created for us in a glass cube or Madison Avenue, right? It just feels like, why? Like, why are we not looking at the true stories behind products? And so I kind of started to rekindle that idea that I kind of seen at American Apparel again when I was working for brands in doing digital product design. And around that time, I kind of discovered cryptocurrencies and started to get into Bitcoin a lot as well, which I saw as a really interesting potential solution to some of the problems I'd seen with making supply chains more transparent. So I actually ended up going to a PhD at that point, which looked at, so it was in computer science, and I was looking specifically at Bitcoin and blockchain tech and its application to helping make supply chains more transparent.
Okay. And then is that where we enter Provenance? Okay.
Provenance was my side project. So so at the time, not that many people were looking at blockchain tech. There was a kind of garnering movement around Bitcoin. And yeah, I was just super interested in the kind of longer term potential for Bitcoin at that time. And then I met, so I was really fortunate in early 2014 to meet a bunch of great people who then went on to build Ethereum.
Okay.
And that for me was a really important moment because I had been experimenting using the Bitcoin blockchain to see if it was possible to track other things other than the Bitcoins themselves. So hanging metadata off of the Satoshis to be able to track something other than a Bitcoin. But then being introduced to Ethereum, there was this whole new world of being able to program blockchains and create these huge applications that could span the globe.
So do you think then that the general focus on cryptocurrency being the dominant application of the blockchain, a bit of a misnomer? Do you think there's something more fundamental going on that's more valuable for society?
Yeah, I mean, I am a big tech optimist. And I think, I mean, it's been a really interesting roller coaster being involved in the blockchain crypto space for the past kind of 6 years. I mean, really a roller coaster in terms of financial rewards, as many people know, but also just seeing how the tech evolved and also seeing how people have come together to create these networks. I mean, it's really inspiring when you look at the creation of Bitcoin and Ethereum. I mean, it's just taken a lot from the open source movement, but just people coming together, all working towards this common platform, I find super inspiring. Yeah, I mean, we have been through a kind of the speculation roller coaster that quite often happens, I think, with new technologies. I think what's interesting about blockchain and crypto is this fundamental link between, I mean, I was kind of talking a bit about this yesterday, this fundamental link between the network and the market needing to come together. You know, the whole point is that you have market dynamics driving the network adoption. So tokens and cryptocurrencies are essential to the powering of these networks. But at the moment, there's a big decoupling between the utility of the network and the value of the token. Most people are speculating and just buying lots of cryptocurrency without really thinking about the actual applications they're powering and whether they really will scale and gain adoption. So,
are there any examples at the moment where you think that those two are coming together, where the sort of the power of the network is coming together with the power of the market in a really effective way?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain degree we see that be effective in the blockchain application and development environment. So Ethereum and Ether, I think, does make sense to a certain degree. Of course, there's lots of speculation, but the mechanics make sense. Yeah, I mean, an example I talk about quite a bit is I really like the work that they're doing at Brave, which is the browser with the basic attention token, to try and help essentially use micropayments through cryptocurrencies to monetize our interactions with content online, which I think is really interesting and seems to make a lot of sense to me. Like, if you want to pay by watching an advert, fine. If you don't, why not pay through some form of token or cryptocurrency that appears to, for me, I think it appears to need to be decentralized because of all of the different types of content we could possibly be engaging with. So I think that one's quite interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's a few others, but I think at the moment there is a bit of a fundamental, lots of tokens and coins aren't necessarily properly being joined to their value, let's put it that way.
Interesting. All right, and so tell us about Provenance then. Like,
sure.
What is it that it does, and how can we use it, and what's the, give us the download.
Yeah, so it started as a side project, and yeah, essentially we're looking at the intersection of these three things, right? So supply chains, brands, commerce, blockchain tech, and social and environmental good. So how can we join those three things together? So yeah, started side project, then became grant-funded project. So we gained a bit of grant money to experiment with whether this really could be a real thing, which led us to do quite a few pilots and particularly looking at the food industry. So we've worked in quite a few sectors that have commoditized products, so commoditized supply chains. And a big thing that we're trying to do is sort of decommoditize the commodity. So take something like fish or like coffee and actually be able to differentiate it. So you're not just competing on price, but you're competing on the origin, the journey, the impact behind it, sort of building on a lot of the work certification has done.
Okay, so for my layman brain, are you saying, would you say that decommoditizing something is the process of adding more nuance, more data, more understanding of the thing, so that it's not seen as the same as everything else and then just differentiated on price?
100%, yes. And also trying to imbue the value they actually have into the product, right? Like rather than treating all coffee as the same thing, actually giving more value to coffee that has a better, better carbon footprint, a more transparent supply chain, whatever that might be, because at the moment that becomes quite difficult to do. So Provenance, we're a tech company, so we now work with over about 300 brands, and they use Provenance as a platform to open up information on their supply chains. So that doesn't involve blockchain at all, simply opening up data on where are they sourcing their products from, who are the people in the supply chain, and increasingly we connect in impact measurements into that as well. So carbon footprint, you could connect in your company's carbon footprint, the factory that you source from's carbon footprint, their commitment to sourcing renewable energy. You can connect in social impact data, and then, of course, lots of data that already exists, like audit reports and lab inspection, certifications. And so essentially we build up this network of transparent information that we use the blockchain to store the information that requires integrity, so certifications or any kind of proof point, essentially, and also to track products through, so to join that information to the flow of products.
Okay, so, we'll come on to some examples in a minute from the global final, but I'm interested in one thing around the grant funding that you mentioned. Because obviously the kind of money that people take on early stage massively shapes the kind of organizations they're running.
Yes.
I'm interested, is this a private company? Is this some kind of other vehicle? And how did the money that you took on early days affect the culture of the organization, and was it the right money?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's something entrepreneurs don't think enough about at the beginning. And I think, so for Provenance specifically, we're actually a for-profit social enterprise.
Yep.
And it took a long time for me to sort of figure that out. For a long time, I thought we should have been I'm still actually not 100% convinced either way, but we could be a not-for-profit. I was quite convinced by many to become a for-profit because there's a feeling that there is social impact funds available, so investors not just looking for a big financial return, but also looking to create some tangible impact in the world. And the potential for growth is much larger with the for-profit. But that was a tricky choice. Then, initially gained grant funding, which I highly recommend because it's free money. Like you don't have to give away the equity.
Who was the grant?
So we gained a grant from the Omidyar Foundation. Okay. So Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, gave us a grant, which was great. It's great because you can experiment, and it's I think it's really, really useful for early stage, particularly deep tech, impact type businesses. And then we went into being equity financed, led by Omidyar, but through their investment vehicles. Okay. So we've kept a kind of a real, making sure our cap table is mostly impact financed, which is important so we can keep our integrity, ensure that we stay true to our true social mission. But we do also have finance from others who are not impact financiers, so like the VC, Digital Currency Group, who are just interested in return. And I think that's a tricky dynamic. I feel happy with what we did. I feel happy that we took the right kind of money that supports the journey I want the company to go on, and I think the team wants the company to go on, which is very much around impact. But wow, I wish I'd known more about how investors work and their return cycles and ahead of raising money, because it's nuts. I mean, when you suddenly kind of put yourself in the shoes of a VC and you realize what they need to show and what they need to justify to their LPs, it just gives you a whole nother perspective on the fundraising process. Yeah,
it's like a crazy computer game where you think you've beaten the big boss, and then you realize, or it's like a series of 24 where you think, oh, this is the big boss. And then it's like, oh no, that's just the beginning.
This is the big boss's gatekeeper, outside the castle.
It just keeps on going. I know the feeling. So give us an example then of somebody that uses your platform and how it's had an impact on their business and where the value is for someone who is actually. It sounds like, if you don't mind me saying, people might be thinking, this could be a lot of work for me to try and figure out how to.
Totally.
Talk to my suppliers about being transparent ourselves, and like, what do we gain from this? So how does the value actually come back to the company that decides to put in this effort to take the stand?
Totally. I mean, for lots of big companies, it is a lot of work because maybe their supply chains aren't designed to be transparent and they're not designed to compete on impact or true stories. That's new for them. And so, some of the larger companies we work for, it is a challenge to kind of get to there, and it does require changes in your approach. Often, some of those changes aren't being motivated purely by transparency, but lots of other things. Investors are demanding more information. There's many people that are demanding to know more about the impact in supply chains. So often those initiatives are motivated by many things, but however, working with us is really motivated by consumer trust.
Okay.
I think there's lots of information on how much value consumers are placing on purpose-driven brands that are showing a commitment to impact. And I think, we're really seeing that be actioned by some of the larger companies. But smaller companies can use our platform too. And we have lots and lots of people that do. I mean, we have it's great kind of mid-tier business that we're working with in the UK called Rebel Kitchen, who create coconut milks and alternative milks. They're just using our platform plug and play, so opening up information just like you could open up information on LinkedIn or something like that. And then for them, actually, they're making their carbon more transparent.
Okay.
So their carbon commitments as a company. So we connect them to the partners that can help them do that, and then pull that data through so that they can then make their carbon commitments. And they've actually brought forward their commitment to being carbon neutral, which is amazing, and communicate that to their end consumer along with their supply chain.
So firstly, it's about them making open their pledges, then potentially building in more support, bringing in more support to help deliver that, and then communicating that message back to their consumers to get more trust and sell more stuff, basically.
And it's kind of a cycle. Like, you can't be fully transparent and communicate all your impact perfectly from the get-go, right? That would require a lot of work. So it's a cycle to take, first steps. Like initially you might just say, here's my tier 1 suppliers, here's where they are, here they are on a map, and here's our carbon as a company, like here's a measurement and our commitment to it. And then from there you can build and slowly kind of increase your commitments and transparency. And
I also assume that if you're looking to get transparency all the way through your value chain, that there might be, that you're more likely then obviously to work with others that are on the similar platform and are of a similar culture. And have you seen some examples where someone's, let's say, committed to this journey, and then all of a sudden their whole supply chain's transformed because they're able to attract different partners and they've really accelerated? I guess maybe even a smaller business, maybe they've accelerated through opting into this culture, because there's good partners for them straight away.
Yeah, no, we're definitely seeing the beginning of that. I mean, I think, we've been working with quite a few fashion brands recently, and that led us up the supply chain to then start working with their materials suppliers. And so many fascinating new kinds of materials that are being used in the fashion industry to reduce impact or to move away from animal products. So one such company that we've been connected to is called Pinatex. They make leather out of pineapple husks.
Obviously,
amazing.
That's the obvious answer.
I mean, like, wow. Through working with one of the brands that source their materials from them, we kind of cascaded up the supply chain to now work with them, which is then spread to other brands and actually is really increasing the profile for this fantastic new material, which can actually empower a lot of brands to have a vegan option in their shoes and accessories, which is becoming more important. And in that kind of material discovery can be catalyzed by us for sure.
So the guy Javier that won last night on the stage, like $310,000.
Sweet.
Good lad, good for him. And grant money, so it's that kind of no strings attached money, which allows you to do what you want to do without heavy weight on top of it. What they're doing is creating a sugar replacement through agricultural waste, like used corn on the cob, the cob of the corn, bit of yeast, bit of water, and then making that into a sugar replacement. How could he or anybody here that's working on an idea, thinking of an idea, working on an early stage business, what would be the first step, meaningful step they could take with you or without you? I mean, probably with your service makes sense, but that would be a good step where they would enter the journey, but it doesn't become too bureaucratic or heavy. We're taking on way too much here by saying this, and we didn't know how much it would take.
Yeah, and it's tricky because I think, I'm very pro transparency, but transparency does come with responsibility, and you need to be sure about it. It needs to have integrity to communicate it. Otherwise, it could catch up with you. I think that business is a great example where transparency will be an important catalyst for them, because if they're going to supply to every single business in the world that seems to need sugar in the food industry. What we could do is work with them to one, help them prove the difference in impact between their solution and a normal sugar cane or sugar beet sourced sugar. Could also help them show their supply chain, so show that this is coming from a waste product and where from, and then be able for them to kind of store all that in one place and then be able to push that down to their customers who can then use this as a differentiator in the market. So rather, perhaps it's also undercutting on price, which is great, but also it's I'm sure got a much better impact than using a traditional source of sugar. So what Provenance does is then help that brand pick up that information, that transparency with integrity, and cascade it through to their customers. So enable people to interact with it on pack, or potentially bring that into their social media and also into their own communications about the brand that uses their sugar product, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So I'm going to come to you guys in a second for one or two questions as we come into land. But I guess I'm just mindful of going back to your American Apparel days. It feels like the fair trade movement, where basically it was like, here's a sticker, and you as the consumer are asked to trust that sticker means that these guys are trading more fairly.
Yeah.
I guess this feels like V2 of that, where instead of saying, trust me and my label, you're actually putting the truth and the information into the hands of the consumers to decide for themselves how they feel, whether it's fairly traded or fairly created or whatever it might be. Would that be fair to say, or am I saying
definitely.
too much?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of fair trade. Definitely a big inspiration, for what we do at Provenance. I think, 100%. I mean, I think certification schemes are really important, and Provenance is certainly not interested in helping kind of create those standards. Those people like Fair Trade do phenomenal work in creating the standards for fair pay in supply chains, and should continue to do so. But I think technology like this could be a really great way for organizations like Fair Trade to have more visibility in the supply chains they work with, and more integrity in the proof of fair payment or whatever it might be early on in the chain. I mean, I also think the other thing is, you do all that work to make your supply chain fair trade, and then they just give you a JPEG, right? It's not a digital thing in any way. And I think a big thing about Provenance is we want people to have, those badges should have integrity, and they should have integrity in the digital world where you're selling your products online and through e-commerce. So I think that's pretty important. I mean, we've looked a lot at, because you can imagine blockchain tech, transparency and payments, if it fits nicely together. And I think there is a huge opportunity there, particularly on the fair trade side.
And it reminds me of a conversation I had earlier with Larry Sanger, the co-founder of Wikipedia, where he was basically saying he's deleted his Facebook account.
Yeah.
He wants a world where he owns his own identity, and if he happens to use various user interfaces that do slightly different things, great, but he should own the data.
Yes.
And in the same way, it feels like I want to own the transparency data of my business.
Yes.
And if Fair Trade want to give me a logo because of how I do business and the data I hold for myself, then great. And if I want that logo, I get it. And if I don't want it, I don't engage with it anymore. Imagine Fair Trade becomes something undesirable. All the work you did to go into that is now lost.
Totally.
Whereas I think what you're saying is, if I do this work to work on my supply chain and open it up, then that's just true is true is true. And if others seem to certify me for it, then
that
great.
would be a wonderful future. It'd be so much easier to certify things that are digitally proven. I mean, blockchain tech has a huge potential to help with us with our own data ownership and privacy, which is a whole nother discussion, but super passionate about that as well. I think we have to move to a state where we're not a product because we're sharing our data, right? We need to be able to have more control and opt into that for sure.
Yeah. Good. I like the sound of that future. I was on the ferry yesterday, and this woman saw me filming, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm working at this conference." And she said, "Does the future look bright?" And I thought, what a nice question. And I thought, I think so. I think so. And I think the way you talk about it, the future does look bright. If we do the right things with the technologies that we have available to us, we can make a great future together. So to wind it up, do any of you guys have a couple of questions for Jessi on Provenance or anything else? Go for it.
Yes. So I hope you can all hear me.
I can hear you.
So I'm currently writing my master thesis on actually blockchain food supply chain and how it can help making it more transparent and add societal value. And what I run into in my interviews now is that they find it hard, the companies that started this find it hard to translate the information into what's actually adding value to the customers. So
Yeah.
you have all the information on the blockchain, but what do you actually show to your customers
Totally.
to make them pay extra money for your transparency blockchain?
Yep. Agreed.
Do you have any ideas on
Yeah, we work on that a lot.
So just in case anybody didn't hear the question, it's how do you take all this data on transparency and turn it into something that you can actually talk to your customers about, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, it's a big problem to crack. And actually, know that we've really are working a lot on that at Provenance. I mean, I think what's tricky is blockchain tech doesn't have a unique front end, right? The way the user interface for a blockchain application looks exactly the same as any other application. And some people believe, and I think I might be in agreement, that blockchain tech hasn't really had its kind of browser moment that the internet had, where we could, where there was a whole new way of interacting with information. I think there will be kind of new user interface elements that come around. I don't think they've been invented yet. There's some ideas out there which I think will help give more integrity to information that's backed with a blockchain than just straightforward transparency with no backing. But I think that's still happening. I mean, we're looking at that a lot, but that's going to be a huge paradigm shift in the internet if we can design new modules and ways of interacting with blockchain-based data versus normal databases. But yeah, the other big challenge with this is simplicity, I think. When you start to get into making supply chains more transparent and opening up information about impact, and supply chains are never a nice linear chain. They're always this like insane tree and the suppliers all keep changing, and the impact's completely different from supplier to supplier. So it's really difficult to digest that to an end consumer who's just like quickly wants to make a decision. I personally have a lot of faith in browsers and our ability to be able to search and customize our searches. So rather than having to like pick logos or analyze the data, is just to be able to almost kind of program our view of different types of e-commerce. Exactly. So you kind of rank your importance, and then that's a way you can view a lot of e-commerce and the internet. And we're seeing that starting to happen. Some of our customers are, particularly retailers, are starting to add different search metrics, which sounds basic, but currently price and color is like the main way of searching on like huge e-commerce sites. So even adding a way for you to filter certain things by impact or by level of transparency, I think will help. But yeah, for me, it's the complexity issue and the difficulty of surfacing blockchain integrity is hard. But yeah, we've been working on both those things. But I can share you some more info as well if you want to get really geek out. Awesome, cool.
Winning connection there.
Yeah.
Just as a one-line summary then, is there one bit of information that you think provides an unfair almost amount of return in terms of value from a consumer that would be true for almost any company? If they start taking seriously measuring their carbon and managing and trying to be interested in that data in a way that they might not be now,
Yep.
is there one bit that you think is a great place to start that does matter to consumers?
Yeah, I mean, so we've done a lot looking, and lots of our customers do a lot looking at what consumers care about. I mean, it's quite depressing if you look at that data, because we care about a lot of stuff, but we don't necessarily put it into action.
Right.
I still am hopeful. I think if we're given an open door, like we're both cost the same, and we pick,
Yeah.
one's got hardly any carbon, one's got lots. I don't think people are going to pick the wrong one. And at the moment, it's very difficult for us to make those choices, so we have to hunt them out. But yeah, no, if you look at that stuff, as consumers, unfortunately, we aren't necessarily seeking out products that have a low carbon or that aren't being made by slaves, etc. But that is getting better. So the simplest things people respond to are photos from the supply chain. Having a photo of a factory or a worker or somebody behind the creation of your product has a hugely disproportionate impact on why we pick that product. I mean, we've got a customer that's a shoe company based in Seattle. We did some very basic transparency for them. We've actually done a lot more now with integrity. We increased sales on the webpage that had that by like 46%.
Wow.
That's insane.
Wow.
I was just like, whoa,
Well, there we
okay,
go.
this is powerful.
Yeah.
So
It's a good place to
I think
start.
it's a good place to start. And then going beyond that, people are looking definitely for more integrity in things like plastic reduction and waste reduction. That's very important to people. And then we are seeing the beginnings of carbon and social impacts needing to have more integrity at the point of sale as well.
Fantastic. One more question. The guy with the best hat in the room. Go for it.
I'm always wondering, because I work in marketing, when such movement starts, it's very simple to accommodate to that, but when it grows big, like there's one guy and one retailer who does good on carbon, and another one does big on slavery, and another one, it's becoming huge, it scales up and it becomes screwed up for consumers because they are challenged with so many decisions to make. How can we, at the starting point of this movement, already think about how does it still work if it scales?
Yes, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's a lot of the point of provenance, right? Like, you could do a lot of what we do without us. You know, you can open up your supply chain. You just need a developer to plot your suppliers on the map. Like, you know, you don't need to work with someone like us. You could use a blockchain to, prove your carbon if you wanted to. You don't need us. But one thing we're trying to do is create a unified way for the data to be stored, the sources all to be included, so it's very clear what you're benchmarking against with your impact. So trying to create that kind of network of references around the data you're exposing, so that then eventually, so that we can help consumers compare like for like and look at similar kind of user interfaces and representation. Because I think that's a lot of the problem at the moment with marketing teams talking about impact, is there's just no reference. And particularly if a CSR team or a marketing team puts out something as a PDF, it's just like, oh my gosh, like no one can extract that data and compare it. We've been trying to do that. I mean, we went through like Kering, for example. Kering Group put out this huge like environmental profit and loss, but there's no benchmark data. It's just like absolute data. So it's really difficult to tell if they're actually doing good or not. And sure, they can say they're doing good for them, but are they? And if you put it out as a big PDF, like how is anyone going to be able to tell that? So yeah, it's a lot of what we're trying to do is help speak in kind of common data formats and present information in common ways that can also help ratings apps and those lots of consumer apps can then take the data and they can start to benchmark and kind of add ratings and opinions which help consumers as well.
Great. Well, I'm sure you'll join me in giving Jessi a massive round of applause and thanks for the conversation today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
And on a personal level, just to say thanks for doing what you do. I think it does make the future look bright for me, and I totally agree that we need to get to a place of standardization so that we can actually know what we're dealing with and be able to maybe even play with the data ourselves and get that deeper relationship. So I'm glad you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
If you guys didn't know, then Shivers partnered with TNW to do the global final yesterday afternoon, the teams that I was referencing earlier, and each year they do this, they give away $1 million to social entrepreneurs, grant funding, no strings attached, like the guy I mentioned, 300 grand in his back pocket, good work. And so it's really great to see what they're doing, and this is the Shivers studio, and hopefully we'll see you next year. So thanks very much for being here. Thank you, Jessi.
Thank you, cheers. Awesome, thanks so much.